Are you looking for an internet talk radio station for your podcast? Look no further. At the helm of Passionate World Talk Radio are two women that want to provide a spot for you and your podcast to be heard. There are many other places for your podcast, but PWTR has the audience. You will not be disappointed. Our station has been on the internet for the past 16 years. Call us for more information. 484-364-1032 or text Jeannie White, station manager at THECONNECTSHOW@gmail.com for podcast show details. Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain.
Hello, everybody. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio Network, where our mantra is to educate, enlighten, entertain. I want to tell everybody Happy New Year, and it's nice to be back. I had a week off, and I have a guest you're going to want to hear, folks. On Chatting with Betsy, there is no taboo subject. My guest and I, we speak our truth. It's raw sometimes. It's emotional sometimes. But I have real conversations with real people, and it's unscripted. So I just want you to sit back and relax. My guest today, I'm so thrilled to have him, is Ravi Shankar. He is a professor. He is a Pushcart Prize-Winning poet and editor of more than 15 books and chapbooks of poetry. He is the founder of Drunken Boat, one of the world's oldest electronic journals of the arts. His book that he wrote is Correctional, a Memoir. And I want to welcome Ravi Shankar, not to be confused with a musician now. Ravi Shankar is with me today. Hi, Ravi.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you. I'm so happy to have you on. I just feel like an instant connection to you. I just love and I always did love the Indian culture, and I love the food. Love Indian food. Where I live, as I told you earlier, is known as Little India. I live in Islin, New Jersey, and I'm very thrilled to have you on. Your book, Correctional, a Memoir, can you please tell us what motivated you to write this book?
Oh, wow, Betsy, and it's so exciting to be with you today, which is the official worldwide launch of the memoir. I've been doing a lot of readings in the fall, and the book hasn't actually been out. And so today you can actually go grab it on Amazon or University of Wisconsin Press, who's published it. And I had a lot of motivations. While we talk about the book, you'll find out a little bit more about my life. But I will say one of the primary motivations, this book encompasses a lot of stories. My parents' immigration from South India and growing up bicultural in Northern Virginia and living through 9/11 in New York. But the core of the story is about these 90 days I had to serve at Hartford Correctional Center for violating my probation by driving on a suspended license. And it happened to be during the time that I was being promoted to full professor at a state university in Connecticut. And so a very traumatic moment in my own life. But the silver lining is that it exposed me to kind of the dark secret in American society, and I met people I never would have met in my everyday life. And I actually made a promise to some of the men that I met. They shared intimate stories of their lives and their families. And they said, you have a voice and we don't, and we want you to do something with it. And so when I made that promise, I knew I had to do something and shape those stories and share them with the world. And so that was part of my primary motivation for writing Correctional.
It had to be quite an experience to be in a correctional place. I mean, it's nothing that you would have ever dreamt of happening to you. And before you had that suspension, you were pulled over before that?
Well, that's right. This book kind of encompasses, it's not just my story. I think in some ways it's a kind of quintessential American tale. And it begins really with a wrongful arrest where I was just in New York and I was under the now deemed unconstitutional policy of stop and frisk, was pulled over making a totally legal left turn and told there was a warrant out for my arrest. And it turned out to be for a 5'8" white guy and 6'2", and definitely look South Asian, so it wasn't for me, but I had to do 72 hours in central booking, this detention center under the streets of Wall Street. So while you're looking up and looking at the skyscrapers, you never might realize that there's this kind of urban holding facility underneath the pavement. And yes, that time I was innocent. I actually ended up suing the city and winning a modest settlement from the NYPD, and it turned out that they had paid well over $1 billion in wrongful arrests and police misconduct suits over the last 20 years or so. So I was certainly not alone, but that was a really eye-opening experience for sure.
Yes, I'm sure that you have quite a story to tell about racial discrimination. They must, there was a mistake. They mistook you're the wrong person. And, how you were treated. And I just want to make something clear, folks. I admire policemen, okay? I respect them. Unfortunately, and this is in all professions, there's bad apples in every profession. Policemen, firemen, doctors, believe me, I met a few. And it ruins it for the rest of them. But I just want to say that this is not, being down on policemen or anything. Ravi's telling his story, his truth. I know you must have seen a lot of discrimination in the jail system and in the processing. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. For me, it was certainly eye-opening, and I agree with you. I think that the great majority of policemen and policewomen are doing great work, and unfortunately, there is this kind of systematic problem. And I was so shocked that first time when I met some of the guys in there who were primarily Hispanic or African American, and they said, brother, if your skin's darker than a grocery bag, you're one of us. If you're on the streets at the end of the month, there's a competition between the precincts to see who could get the most collars. And I thought this was all just stories, but subsequently in the trials that came out, much of what I was told was reported to be true. But my other experience, and again, it's my subjective experience when I was at Hartford Correctional over these 90 days, and I should just say it was an unusual I wasn't convicted of anything. It was a pretrial detention, and my attorney managed to space it out over about a year and a half. And so the book is about that over a decade ago, 2012, I think I had the most probably surreal year of my life because I had to do these 45 days at Hartford Correctional. And then I got out and I got on a plane and flew to Hong Kong to teach my graduate students. And I was having drinks with the ambassador at the top of the Ritz-Carlton. And then I got back on a plane and flew back to do another 2 weeks at Hartford Correctional. And so it was a kind of head-spinning time in a lot of ways. But what I experienced was that probably 95% of the men that I was with were men of color. I wasn't in a cell. I was in a dorm with 60 other men, 2 dorms, dorm A and dorm B, 120 men probably. And probably over 100 were either Latino or African American, and they told me some of their stories. What I realized is the generational damage that mass incarceration has wrought on so many families. And, some of them, I remember this one young man who had gotten arrested for smoking a joint on the street and had a bond that he couldn't pay, which wasn't very much money. I think it was $5,000 or something, but he wasn't able to pay it. And so he had been waiting there in jail for over 3 months. And every time he went to trial, the court would be continued. And during that time, he had been going to night school for economics. He flunked out. He missed the birth of his first son. And now he has a criminal record, and he didn't know what he was going to do. He was totally distraught. And so while there were certainly men in there that were guilty of crimes and some who had substance abuse problems or mental health issues, I really didn't see any of that being addressed in a productive way. If anything, it seemed like they were getting re-stigmatized and dysregulated so that when they went out, they were less equipped to re-enter society.
Yes, I think that a lot of mental health issues need to be addressed if someone is in a correctional facility. And I think the problem with that, Ravi, is that men in general are afraid to ask for help because society needs to change their way of thinking, that it's a weakness if a man asks for help. And it's not. It's not a weakness. I keep saying this on my show because I'm a mental health advocate also, that we need to address issues. And as a preschool aide, I saw children with issues that if they weren't going to be addressed, they would lead into problems as they went into, teenage years and adulthood. So I think when children start showing signs, and then it needs to be addressed and not shoved under the carpet. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I totally agree, and I think the problem is that depending on where you live in the community that you grow up, you may not have access to the kind of mental health. I think most schools should have a mental health counselor as part of the staff, but I know that's not true for many places. And yes, as a young person, you need stability and positive reinforcement and modeling of good behavior. I think all of that is really necessary. And I feel like there should be. As a society, it feels to me like we're not very forgiving. And if someone has served some time and paid their debt to society and they truly want to move forward with their lives, there are just so many obstacles and impediments in their way that don't allow them to do this. And, that's been one of the things that in the time since I've written the book, I've been advocating on behalf of criminal justice reform in some ways, but also working with some of these men and women and helping them with their resumes. And I just spoke to this young man, Donnell, who he was a musician and he was in jail for 18 months. And he's gotten out, and he's very grateful for the assistance and the reentry help he's getting. But as he told me, he said, well, they have me flipping burgers or working at Dunkin' Donuts as if that's the only thing that I'm capable of. And I was writing my own music and doing all of this stuff before I went in. And I feel like now who I can be has been narrowed. And, on a much larger level, you could get disenfranchised. You could lose your right to vote. You can lose your right to live in particular places, and this is something that follows you for the rest of your life. And so that, I guess we pay so much as taxpayers for this criminal justice system, and I think it's worth it to say, well, is it really effective? Is it working? Why do we have one of the highest recidivism rates of the entire developed world? Why, when we only have 5% of the world's population, do we have 25% of the world's incarcerated population, more than China and North Korea and Iran combined, when we are the bastion of freedom? And so these are difficult questions that I found myself asking while I was, trying to pass the time in these 90 days, writing in journals, doing whatever I could to kind of stay safe and alive. And, I was away from my young daughters, who now are 16 and 12, beautiful. But at that time, they were very little, and I was away from them and my family. And so these are some of the issues I was grappling with, I think.
That had to be very difficult for your family that time, being in the correctional facility, and then you're traveling, doing your job. How did they cope with it?
Well,
so your partner
married to the mother of my daughters, in part, I think, because of this. The book is really about how in the midst of it, and, I didn't come from one of these unstable communities. I came from a very loving family, and I had, every benefit in a lot of ways. I educated in an Ivy League institution, and so how in the middle of my life could I take a wrecking ball to my job, my career, my family? My marriage was kind of breaking up at that time. And we had decided to tell my older one, who at that time was 8 years older, so she was in school, what was happening, and I framed it as a kind of teaching moment. Little did we realize that she would go out in the playground and say, guess what, my daddy's going to jail. So, which in a small town in Connecticut where we already kind of, my wife's not South Asian, but I am, and was a pretty homogenous community where we already stood out a little bit. And so certainly that extra notoriety was also very difficult. And, the other thing is my predicament, because I was already a semi-public figure. I'm a pretty well-published poet and editor. I'd been on the radio, and because I was a professor at a state university, this became really sensational, big news. And Connecticut is very sleepy. And so even though it was just a misdemeanor offense, I was a professor, and I think the Hartford Courant must have written 8 or 10 newspaper articles about me. They sent out news vans to my house where my daughters were waiting for the school bus. And so it was certainly, for someone who wants to get attention for one's work and service to the community, to have this attention but have it be in this totally negative light was certainly really also very disastrous for my family. And I think that's part of the reason I decided to leave. I subsequently got a fellowship to go to the University of Sydney, and I was in Australia. I did bring my girls there for a summer, which was lovely. But I felt like I needed to kind of leave that community to reinvent myself and really to pour my heart and soul into telling this story, which had not been told in the newspaper, certainly. And that was the other thing. We were in this moment of fake news and all of that. And when I was being covered, I just realized there's not a lot of room for nuance or complexity in journalism, that once you come up with a tagline and a story, and there's this idea, if it bleeds, it leads. And that's certainly true, that you want to sell, you want clickbait. And so this idea, a poet and professor promoted while in prison, has this kind of alliterative, snappy appeal. And the fact that I was one of the few faculty members of color at Central, did that have something to do with it? Who knows? But I certainly know that the union told me that there had been other faculty members who had been arrested or had other problems that had never been reported in the paper. So all of that certainly was very, very surreal and difficult to deal with. I write about in the book that the one chapter where I find out that I'm going to keep my promotion to full professor, and this is all being reported in the news, and I'm really utterly humiliated. And then there on the inside, because I've been on the news, all of a sudden I become kind of a folk hero, and all of the men are cheering for me and giving me free food, and even the correctional officers are coming up to me and asking me how they can apply to college. And so again, there was this moment of kind of schizophrenia. On the outside I'm being humiliated, on the inside I'm being celebrated, and really, who am I? I'm neither of those things. I'm something really very different, and kind of reflecting on that and exploring that, I think, is part of what I wanted to do in Correctional.
That I agree with you with the news, because once they get a hold of something, they're like a dog with a bone and don't want to let go, and they embellish. I know someone did an interview with me about 4 years ago, and she embellished what I said. And I'm like, I didn't say that. So, and
right.
I was just giving an interview about my husband's story. So when you have someone who's a professor and, you are Asian Indian, so throw that in there, and it's going to be a 3-ring circus. Sorry to say. But,
yeah.
Let's, publicize and write. And I'm sure they embellished a lot of things and didn't do it 100% accurately.
I
had
a journalist come and sit with me and look over my promotion and tenure files and my books and my student evaluations. I've been nominated for the Excellence in Teaching Award. And he said, I can see why, of course, that you're such an asset to the school and why they would want to retain you. Did any of that ever make it into any of the articles? No. Instead, they had this kind of sensationalized portrait. One of my friends said it was almost like I was a wild animal escaped from the zoo, someone who had this kind of drinking problem and addiction problems and was shaping the young, impressionable minds of students. And what I came to realize, actually, in part, because I had already really been promoted. It just needed to be rubber stamped by the Board of Regents. It had already gone through my department and my chair and dean and provost and president. And it was just months later, when I was finishing off these 90 days, somehow a reporter at the Hartford Courant got a hold of it, and it turned out the Board of Regents is appointed by the Democratic governor, and it was an election year. And so this journalist, who was a former Republican legislator, now turned Hartford Courant columnist, Kevin Rennie, used me in a way to score political points and to say, oh, well, isn't the government inefficient? They're kind of promoting this guy who shouldn't be in the classroom. And in some ways, my story was beside the point, because I was almost collateral damage in the larger political calculus that was happening. And that I never realized was happening until after the fact.
That is, what an incredible story. Ravi, I'm going to ask you what I ask all authors, and that is, what would you like the reader to take away from your story?
Wow, my real hope is, and I worked on this book for 7 years. I think it's really well crafted. I had a lot of really great editors and readers, and I didn't really talk about the structure, but I also have these 6 letters in the book to important people in my life, and they're kind of modeled in India. We have in South India, where my parents come from, 6 seasons, and so there are these 2 additional seasons to the 4 we have here: the pre-vernal, which comes before spring, and the monsoon, the season of heavy rain. And so each of these 6 seasons is represented by one of the 6 letters in the book. So I hope the reader will appreciate the craft and the narrative and feel empathy for these men. But my most important takeaway, I hope, is that this book doesn't stay as a static literary artifact, but as a genuine call to action that helps us open our minds and hearts to the world around us, the unfairness and inequity that might exist, and to do what we can, whether locally in our community or nationally with an organization, to try to shift things, because I feel like what I have seen I cannot unsee, and it has transformed my life. It's definitely made me, I think, a better educator and more empathetic to people who I might have dismissed in the past after having gone through what was a really humbling experience. Now I feel really deeply connected to even those of us that are kind of at the bottom of society in some way. And I feel like I want to do what I can to uplift and to help heal. And I hope that my reading Correctional will give that same kind of feeling and energize the readers of the book.
That is beautiful, Ravi. And I find in my own personal life that, sometimes if you look at a tragedy, can turn into something wonderful a lot of times. You take your pain and your hurt and you use it to help other people, and that's what you're doing. You are a voice for these people, and their stories can be told through your book, and you don't know where it could go. I think they should make a movie about your book. I really do.
Well, you're not the first person who said that, Betsy, so who knows? And I love what you said. In the book I mentioned there's this Japanese concept of Wabi-Sabi, which is, in Japanese pottery, sometimes when you're making it and the pot cracks in the kiln, instead of throwing it away because it's not perfectly symmetrical, the Japanese will inlay it with gold and call attention to the flaw in some way, and it becomes more valuable. And so this idea that the scar can be a source of beauty, I think, is a really amazing one.
Yes, I've heard that. And I saw a picture of that, and with the saying to it, which similar to what you just said. And I'm thinking, yes, people think they're flawed because maybe they, did drugs, or maybe they were arrested for something. But we learn, from our mistakes, and we can help other people from our stories. And this is what my podcast is about, Ravi Shankar, is people telling their stories to help other people, because we all touch each other's lives. We're all connected in some way. And I really do hope your book sells, and I hope they make it into a movie. And when they do, I could say, I interviewed him. I'm chatting with Betsy. I think, your book is phenomenal. It's powerful, and I think it will have quite an impact on people who read it. I think as a society, we do judge people. And there are people who have certain offenses that they can't do certain jobs, because they ask you that when you apply for a job. If you ever were arrested for certain things, and so they don't get a chance. And I think if society starts when children are young, to get the mental health resources to them, to get the counseling for them, to have mentors to help them, I think it could change society around. And I really hope that happens. You could probably tell that I was born in the late 50s.
I totally agree with you, Betsy. Yeah.
We need to help each other and to give each other a chance. I always say we're the same. We're more alike than we are different. And if people would just put aside their differences, it would be a much better world. But I thank you for writing this book, Ravi Shankar. I think I forgot to say you were the author. And they can purchase this book at Amazon.com. And is there any media links that people can get in touch with you, Ravi?
Yeah, sure. You can follow me on Twitter and Insta at Impurpler, EMPURPLER, and there is also a Correctional Memoir Instagram account that my creative producer is running. And the book is out with University of Wisconsin Press, and you can get the ebook on Amazon. And if you do read it, I'm totally happy to visit any book clubs, salons, and have conversations, because all of the conversations have been so rich, just like this one. So thank you so much for having me on, Betsy.
Oh, my pleasure, Rob. It's a pleasure to meet you. And if you ever come down to Edison, let me know.
It sounds like you can handle a little bit of spicy food too, huh?
Yes, I could meet you. I just think I learned a lot about Indian cuisine where I worked, and I just love doses. But I always loved the Indian culture. Ever since I was a little girl, there was a show. I don't even remember the name of the show, but it's about a little boy in India, and I always wanted to go to India. But I always loved the clothing, and it's just that I feel that the Indian culture is so beautiful. It's family-oriented. I mean, it might be changing now, but very close family. And I love Diwali. We used to celebrate Diwali in school. Yes, beautiful, beautiful clothing. And we used to dress up. But I thank you for writing this book. I'm sorry that you went through what you went through, but I know it made you a stronger person. And like you said, it made you a better person. And this is what happens, folks, when you go through something. We could use an experience. Ravi could have turned against society after this and be bitter, but you're not. You're helping people. You are being a brighter light, and that is wonderful. And I wish you much success on your book. Folks, go to Amazon.com and get Ravi Shankar's book, Correctional, a Memoir. And I know that you will enjoy reading the book. Well, thank you, Ravi Shankar, again. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much, Betsy, and stay safe, everyone.
Yes, thank you, Ravi. Folks, if you missed any of this podcast, you could catch it again on your favorite podcast. It's free to subscribe to Chatting with Betsy. I am on Castbox, Spreaker, Spotify, just to name a few. And you never know who I will be having on my show, so please subscribe. I also want to thank Jeannie White, who is station manager, Passionate World Talk Radio Network, for writing the blog and producing the show. Please read the blog, which will have information. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, CEO of Passionate World Talk Radio, who makes this all possible. And I want to thank you, the listeners, for listening, downloading, sharing, subscribing. Go on one of these podcasts and rate my show. Hopefully you give it 5 stars. And I want to thank everyone for listening. This show is for you. It's my way of paying it forward. In a world where you can be anything, folks, please be kind because the world needs it. And please be safe out there. Till we chat again, this is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio Network. Bye-bye now.
Are you looking for an internet talk radio station for your podcast? Look no further. At the helm of Passionate World Talk Radio are 2 women that want to provide a spot for you and your podcast to be heard. There are many other places for your podcast, but PWTR has the audience. You will not be disappointed. Our station has been on the internet for the past 16 years. Call us for more information. 484-364-1032 or text Jeannie White, station manager, at THECONNECTSHOW@gmail.com for podcast show details. Thank you for listening to Passionate World Talk Radio. You can listen to this program all over again by going over to https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. You can also hear it on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, AMFM247.com every Tuesday evening between 8 and 9 p.m. YouTube, Facebook, Facebook Live, LinkedIn, and all the other podcast directories one can find on the internet.